don't know, my name's Alexis Tyndall. I'm the Manager of Digital Innovation here at the University of Adelaide Library. And one of the co-conveners and organising group of the Artificial Intelligence for Libraries, Archives and Museums Australia New Zealand chapter. Some of you will have seen our webinars before. Just in opening, I live and work on the lands of the Kaurna people, and before we start, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to them as the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands I'm joining you from today. I acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship with the Kaurna people of the country, and respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. I am very aware that we have people joining us from across Australia and the world, and I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to any relevant communities that are represented here today. And with that, I'd like to hand over to my friend and colleague, James Robertson from Digital New Zealand, to welcome us on behalf of our New Zealand friends.
Hi, thanks, Alexis. Sorry, there's been a little bit of a change in the office space that I'm in, and so you may see people walking around behind me, which I hadn't really clicked to before. I work at the National Library of New Zealand in the Digital New Zealand unit. I'm the systems manager here, and I'm very pleased to be part of, or one of the co-conveners for the AI for LAM in Australia and New Zealand. Thanks very much to Ingrid and Alexis for inviting me and Rowan along. I'd like to give you a little welcome now. Kia koutou, ngā maunga, ngā awa, ngā waka, ngā tupuna o Aotearoa. Me te whenua moe moe e hui hui mai nei, tēnā koutou katoa. Which means, to you, the mountains, rivers, waka, ancestors of Aotearoa and the land of the dreaming that are gathered here, greetings to you all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, James. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and let us know where you're joining in from, please feel free to do so in the chat. So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Unlocking the Archives Together, Text Recognition and Extraction. This is the latest in a series of webinars from the Australian and New Zealand chapter of AI for LAM. And I really, as I mentioned, like to welcome back our repeat attendees and a special hello to anyone who's tuning into this group for the first time. We have had more than 100 registrations for today's webinar, which is fantastic to see. And quite a few international registrations. So if you are tuning in at a very odd hour or waiting for the video recording, a special hello to you. If anyone is interested in further engagement with this community and participation, then we'll share some information at the end of the session about how to get involved. Just in terms of housekeeping, I'd like to make sure that you all know today's session will be recorded and shared online on the University of Adelaide's Library's YouTube page after the event. Yes, as I said, please introduce yourself in the chat window. You should be able to see the icon at the bottom of the screen and share anything you want to share about your interest in these issues. That will also be the best place for asking questions, and feel free to enter any questions throughout the sessions. Ingrid and Rowan and me and James on that chat window and making sure we take note of those questions and put them to our speakers at the end of their presentations today. We'll also be sharing some links in that window. I know especially Tim has made his slides available online if people would like to follow along as we go. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to our excellent speakers that we have today. So we have Catherine Dan, who has worked in archives, records, libraries and information management for more than 20 years, with roles at the National Archives of Australia, National Library of Australia and Monash University. In her role as the ANU University Archivist, she oversees archives of business, trade unions, professional associations and industry bodies, and they're used to support research by the university community and the general public. I'll also introduce Tim at this point. Tim Sherritt is a historian and hacker who researches the possibilities and politics of digital cultural collections. In roles at the National Archives of Australia, National Museum of Australia, with Trove at the National Library of Australia, and many other roles, including academic appointments, Tim has had impact on how GLAM collections are computationally accessed and used. He shares his work generously through the GLAM Workbench and a range of workshops, webinars, teaching and learning opportunities. And with that, I would like to hand over to Catherine, and Catherine will follow straight on with Tim. And so I will turn my camera and microphone off and rejoin you at the end of the presentations. So thanks very much, Catherine and Tim.
Thank you, Alexis. I'm going to start off and then hand over to Tim. I'm speaking today from Ngunnawal and Ngambri land, land never ceded. So I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to the archival material that we're talking about and the work that Tim has been doing with it. And I am going to share just a couple of slides. bear with me while I just get them up in the right sort of display. And share my screen. Now, can everybody see that? Yes.
Yes.
Good. Excellent. So, now I need the slide to move. Yay. So, the material that we're talking about comes from the ANU archives, and you might say, well, stock exchange registers, why are they at ANU? So the ANU archives actually has 4 main collections. The university archives, most universities will keep records of their own activities for the long term. Pacific Research Archives, which takes in both ANU work, but also collects research material of interest in research about the Pacific. The National HIV/AIDS Archive, which is a collected archives which commenced in the 1990s. We still add to it, but it's a sort of special formed collection. And then the vast majority is what's called the Noel Butlin Archives, which is the Archives of Business and Labour. So that takes in company records that date back to the 19th century from prominent Australian companies like Australian Agricultural Company, CSR, so sugar refining, Burns Philp, which is shipping and manufacturing and retail, Tooth and Company, which is probably one of our most popular series, which is about brewing and hotels. So the company records cover pastoral and agricultural, mining, manufacturing, all sorts of things. And it's related to that we hold the stock exchange records. So there were various stock exchanges throughout Australia. In 1987, they amalgamated to become the Australian Stock Exchange. And in 2008, the ASX donated records to the archives. And they included this component of Sydney Stock Exchange stock and share lists from 1901 to 1950. So don't need to read the detail. That's really just to say, here is our archival description of the Sydney Stock Exchange stock and share lists. You know, the history, their format, so their large bound format registers, and the ones from 1901 to 1950 are 199 bound volumes. They contain, and Tim will go into this in more detail, the trading in stocks and shares that was posted up at the stock exchange at the close of trading session, and they tend to be pre-printed sheets with handwritten annotation. So why did we want to digitise them at all? This is just an image of a page. They're a rich concentration of information on the listed businesses, on share prices, on trading activity, and they cover a significant period. So 2 world wars and a depression. But if you wanted to extract that information and use it, it would take a lot of close reading. So we knew from interaction with economic historians that there was potential research use here. And so really we were coming from, well, we want to expose this. So the first step, digitisation, but you know, that doesn't give you very much. That's, you know, our open research repository. You can see the images of the pages, but can you really explore them? So this project is a valuable experiment for us in conversion of, you know, what we hold, and we have a whole lot more, and can it apply to it? That's a question for the future. And we hadn't done any of these things beyond simple OCR. We hadn't done anything in this sort of area. So we went to Tim, and I'm now going to hand over to Tim to tell you what he's done. Stop share. Oops.
Thanks, Catherine. And now let me just Okay. Got in there. So, and I've shared the link to my slides. Hi everyone, and greetings from Nipaluna, the lands of the Mawinana people. I'm glad to be here talking about this project. It's been a really interesting project to be working on. And I will just make sure that's popping up my chat so I can see anything there. The slides are there, and I shared them through the chat as well, so feel free to explore as we go along. Yeah, no, this has been a really interesting project, and in particular because it's been an opportunity to experiment with different technologies to see how they worked and what were appropriate and how they could be sort of joined up to create different sorts of workflows. In particular, the work that I've been doing, I've been documenting it all in Jupyter Notebooks. So the code, creating the code, running it, testing it, visualizing the results, documenting what I'm doing all within Jupyter Notebooks. And also, as you see, using it to create public-facing apps as well, which gives some access to the work that we've been doing. And also, you know, one useful thing in terms of Jupyter Notebooks in particular is at different times being able to create little sort of ad hoc apps which enable me to do particular tasks. So such as sort of, you know, cleaning data or testing data or whatever. Being able within Jupyter Notebooks, just quickly create a little app which, you know, have widgets and buttons and drop down lists and all that sort of stuff. Quite easy and quick to create those, and just enables me to do particular tasks quite efficiently. So that's an extra benefit of using Jupyter for these sorts of things. Using things like computer vision, OpenCV, CloudStor, so all the images of the stock exchange records were uploaded to CloudStor. So part of the project has been sort of thinking about how we move this data around in various ways, using different tools. In terms of extracting the data, looking at originally Transcribus for the handwriting recognition part in particular, Zooniverse for transcription of the documents to create, you know, testing sets or gold standard sets or whatever, and also other tools like Tesseract, which is open source OCR tool, and Textract, which is another text extraction tool provided by Amazon. And we'll look at some of these in a bit more detail. But yes, we experimented with all of these at different times throughout the project. So the challenges in approaching this sort of project, I mean, obviously scale is a major challenge here. So there's 199 volumes, there's 70,000 images, so 70,000 pages within those volumes. They're all sort of large format volumes. So all those pages have been digitized. So there's 70,000 TIFF files, 100 megabyte TIFF files. So yeah, a lot of data to be working with and moving around. But also, as well as just the scale of these, it's the structure of these, as we'll see. They combine different elements. So there's a number of rows and columns. There's both printed text and handwritten text. And all of that is important if we're going to make use of this as a data set. And there's actually quite a lot of variability within the volumes and the pages. So different numbers of columns over time, different handwriting, of course, different ink, different quality of paper, and all of these have at different times impacted on what we've been able to do as well. So here you can see, you know, as humans looking at these things, we can say, oh yeah, they're all the same. You know, they're basically all called the same. But you know, when you're actually starting to do computational processes on them, it's when the differences become much more obvious. So I mean, obvious things here like the number of columns changes, the size of the pages change. So we see we've got a smaller page on top of a bigger page in that instance. The handwriting, as I say, varies. You get at different times these sort of examples where stocks have been written in the printed column. Other things have been crossed out. You have overlapping annotations, different ink colors, again, different number of columns. So all these sorts of variations throughout the set. And it's the relation between this sort of variability and the scale which makes it particularly challenging, because at the start, when you've got 70,000 images, you're not really sure about the range of variations within those 70,000 images. So there's this constant process of exploration as you're starting to sort of build the processes around them, of finding where these differences are and what the implications of those differences are. Obviously, we're working with two sets of data here. One is the page metadata, so 199 volumes, and the archive staff, in describing those volumes, have recorded things like the start and the end date of each volume, the number of pages of each volume. But within those bounds, there's obviously each page has a date, it has a session. So there were morning sessions, noon, afternoon sessions. So that's significant metadata about that page. So it's the date and the session of each page that we need to find. And then there's the content of the page itself, of course. And as I've said, it's that combination of print, of handwriting, but also the grid structure, the table structure. That's a significant part of the content as well, because if the aim of this project is to create structured data, which is actionable by computational processes, so that you can, theoretically look at the total amount of trading that's been done, or the amount of the value of trading that's been done on a particular day, we need to have that structure where we have both the names of the stocks, but we have the values of the trading in each of the columns also recorded, and within specific fields, so we can address those particular values. So to put everything together, what we need is to compile all that metadata around the pages, the date and the sessions. We need to extract the text, both the printed and the handwritten text, and we need to do that in a way that preserves the table grid, so that all of those values, those text and those handwritten values, are in fields which we can easily identify and address. So that's, the big aim is to create a data set which has all of that structure there, so that it does open up all sorts of possibilities for computational work within it. So obviously, I think probably the most complex bit is that getting the text and the sort of table grid and keeping that together in a way that the structure, the text still is embedded within that structure. And I suppose, there's a couple of ways you can approach that. One is to try and extract the grid itself from the page by looking at features on the page, such as, where the straight lines are. And then using that to guide the OCR, the handwriting recognition processes. And Transcribers, for example, does allow you to define a sort of template, a grid template, which you can apply to a page in order to identify where particular bits of text belong within that grid. So that's sort of creating the grid beforehand and applying that to the OCR, the handwriting recognition. Another approach would be just to throw everything at the OCR, the handwriting recognition processes, get back lots of positional information for all the different bits of text that have been recognized, and then use that positional data to try and reconstruct the table grid. By saying, okay, well, it looks like we've got lots of text going down here. That must be sort of a column, that sort of thing, to try and figure out where that grid is. Or we could actually combine a bit of both, looking at the page features, but also looking at the positional data of the recognized text as well. And effectively, that's what we've done, is to combine a bit of both approaches as we've gone along. So one of the first things I was looking at was ways of identifying the main columns within a page. So this is a typical sort of page, and you can see there are 3 main columns on this page. Within each column, of course, we have other columns, but these are each column represents a block of stocks which are being traded. So you have the sort of names of the stocks here. Then you have the sort of bids that are being made for buying or selling, and then any business, any stocks which have actually changed hands are recorded. The prices are recorded here. So we have the main columns, and then within each column, there's another 4 columns. So what I was doing in the first instance was just trying to split the main pages up, the pages up into the main columns, just to sort of simplify the handling of those. And I did that just by using computer vision, just by finding the lines, clustering them together, and that enabled me to separate out the columns. And having done that, I mean, one useful process all the way along in this project has been, once I've sort of tried one of these processes, is to then attempt to visualize the results to see what that shows us, both in terms of whether the process is actually working, but also to see what it tells us about the collection as a whole. Because as I say, we've been constantly learning about the collection as we go through applying these different sorts of processes. So having done that work on recognizing the columns, I had, the widths of the identified columns. So this is just a visualization showing the number of columns and their widths. So the little sort of blue bit along the bottom here is the gutter that's been identified on that page. And then first column, second column. And you can see some pages had 3 columns and some pages had 2 columns. So that's what it represents. And you can see the sort of patterns there, which is useful because, where the pattern sort of breaks down is obviously a point where you want to go in and check to see what's happening. And also, it also tells us about the digitalization process in that the page widths, the image widths themselves do mostly the same, but there are some variations in those as well. So we can apply that to the whole collection. So that's the first 100 volumes, all visualized. And you can see obviously there's significant features like 1914 there where trading was closed, and so there's a lot fewer pages. But we can zero in to see where there are particular problems. So here, for example, we can see obviously there's something funny going on at these points. We want to go in there and see what's happening. And there are actually cases where additional material has been bound into the volumes. So little brochures and other pages which are not the trading sheets have been bound into the volumes, and they were digitized along with everything else, but they're actually not the documents that we're interested in. So then have to sort of filter them out of the data set. But as I said, that process of developing a way of processing the data, then visualizing that, seeing if it's working, understanding a bit more about the collection, which then enables us to move on to the sort of next steps. So that was the work on the columns. Another sort of feature of the pages which I looked at was just sort of pulling off the headers of the pages. The headers contain information about the session of each page. So that's forenoon, which is morning, and the date there. So obviously we wanted that information for each page. And again, thinking about ways of getting that information out. So we started a process of loading a lot of these headers into a Zooniverse project, which we created, and some of the archive staff did some transcription of these. We were just sort of seeing how the process might work in terms of developing a sort of gold standard data set or a training data set that we could use with something like Transcribus for getting out the handwritten information. So they started doing some transcription of these. So they did a bit of that, and then I took what they'd done away and did a bit of analysis of it, and started to think about, well, with things like dates, how many points within a year do we need before we can identify a complete run of pages? Because there are only particular days on which there are going to be pages. So we should be able to sort of fill in the blanks computationally without having to transcribe everything. So I did a bit of fiddling around with that. I went away and I looked at the legislation in New South Wales about holidays, about when there were holidays, to try and figure out what days we might expect there to be trading. I used that to some of that information with the information that we had from the volumes to essentially predict the number, try and predict the number of pages that should be within a volume based on what we knew about the number of pages that were created per day and any known holidays. So from those, we could predict a number of pages that should be in a volume, and I could compare that with the number of pages that were actually in the volume to see how they matched up, to see whether you know, we might be able to sort of fill in those blanks, that, you know, that it was close enough that it seemed like a promising way to move forward. So I did those predictions, and as you can see, they were pretty close. So that indicated that you know, it did seem to be something worth pursuing, rather than thinking that we needed to transcribe all those dates or extract all those dates by other means. We could actually just sort of fill them in, or make some assumptions and fill them in. And this is an example where I created a little tool in a Jupyter notebook, which I could just take a volume and grab their headers from pages and have the, as you can see there, the expected date there based on the sort of the position within the volume and the number of pages, and could just, you know, compare that by site with the actual date on the page. So I could do this for a volume and just quickly scan down to see where there were problems within that volume. So where there might be missing days or missing sessions. And then if there were, for example, missing days, I would do a bit of investigation. Basically, I'd search Trove to see whether I could find a reason for why there might not be any trading that day. So whether there was a holiday that wasn't legislated, and that did happen every now and then for things like, you know, when kings and queens died and all that sort of stuff, the stock exchange would close, or there might be a holiday, and so that sort of stuff would be documented in Trove. In some cases, you know, there were days missing and I don't know why, you know, I couldn't find any particular reason. Similarly, there might just be pages missing or sessions missing. So the afternoon might be missing or the morning might be missing. So there are gaps, and I suppose that's to be expected. I mean, these were sheets which were used within the stock exchange. They were filled in and put up on the wall and then taken and bound. So along the way, some pages have gone missing in that process, but that's obviously important information if somebody's going to make use of this data set down the track. So important to have that information. So I recorded where things were missing, and that then sort of retested a volume until it sort of all matched up. And through that process, I was eventually able to get a complete data set. I also, along the way, created a data set of New South Wales holidays from 1901 to 1950, filling in all those little oddities as well as the sort of expected things. So the, you know, visit of the Duke of Cornwall, for example, in May 1901, there was a holiday in Sydney for that. So there are various little odd things like that, which you might not expect in there as well. So that's a data set, a CSV file, which you can download and make use of. It's sort of an offshoot of this project. So I ended up with a complete set of pages and dates. So every page has a date and a session now assigned to it, all those 70,000 pages. Again, ways of visualizing that. So as a sort of calendar view to see where particular pages, where you've got pages missing. And in the live version of this, when you mouse over, you actually see if there's no pages there, it will tell you whether it's a holiday or whatever. So you can sort of again scan to see where there might be problems within that data set. And I could at that point start creating some access points for researchers. So this is a little tool sitting within the GLAM workbench which just enables somebody to choose a particular date and see what pages there are from that date. It indicates whether there are pages missing from that date, and it just gives you, and it just shows you the pages. So just one way, just by having those dates and those sessions, we could sort of start to facilitate access to specific parts of the data set. And from there, of course, we've been working on actually trying to get the text out of those pages. So originally I was experimenting with Tesseract open source OCR. I mean, getting out the printed text had sort of two purposes. Obviously, we wanted the text itself, but the position of that text also gave us the position of the rows on the page, which we also wanted. So that's sort of why I was working with Tesseract. And, you know, I was pretty impressed with the results. It was pretty good, considering some of the text is pretty small and the pages are, the quality of the pages is quite variable. So I did that across all 70,000 pages, and, you know, was reasonably happy with the results, but there still is quite a lot of variation. And when I tried to take those share names and sort of normalize them, cluster them, I found there was a lot of noise within them. And as you can sort of see here, we have these sort of, while we have the sort of name of the stock, we have sort of other little bits creeping in there. And there are, within the printed pages, there are things like, you know, ditto marks and you know, ellipsis, you know, dots and things like that. And Tesseract seemed to try and want to identify some of these marks, and it did create quite a bit of noise. And although I tried to filter out a lot of these things, it was quite difficult to get everything. So I spent a bit of time just trying to, as I say, clean up and cluster these results. And wasn't getting very far, and it was quite frustrating. So I thought I would have a go at another OCR system. And so I tried Amazon Textract. And there was a lot less noise in the results. So that was the big advantage over Tesseract for this process. And also, of course, with Textract, we got the OCR of the print, but we also get the handwriting recognition. So these are the handwritten values as well. So with one hit, we're getting both back. So this, you can actually play with Textract if you want to have a look. You need to have an Amazon account, but then you can just upload images and you get an idea of the how it's going to work. So you see we're getting the handwritten values here identified as well as the print. It's not perfect, of course, but it's pretty good. Interestingly, just their their basic OCR product is quite good. When I thought it would be interesting to actually look at what they offer in terms of their table analysis, whether that would actually, you know, give us our columns and our rows and things. But I found it actually didn't work terribly well with these documents. And it's also about 10 times more expensive than their basic OCR product. So yeah, not really worth it in this instance. Just comparing the Tesseract and Textract results, you can see they're pretty similar. I mean, Textract is getting the names. I mean, Tesseract is getting the names in most cases, but it's that noise, as I said, which was the frustrating part. And of course, we're getting the handwriting recognition as well. Cost, I mean, Textract does cost. And here's the little, I did a little calculation of how much. So we've got 240,000 column images from those 70,000 pages. Textract costs 0.0015 cents. So if you work that out, it's about $360 US worth. So it's pretty cheap just for the basic OCR product. I mean, it did cost us a bit more than that because I had to do some things a couple of times. And indeed, there were problems, of course, with any of these sorts of processes. One is some images, columns, I seem to be just getting garbage back from Textract. And I eventually figured out that it wasn't actually garbage. It was actually just upside down and back to front. It was taking the images and sort of flipping them around and then reading them. I managed to fix that by forcing it to keep the original orientation. And I did that in a couple of ways. One, by putting a border down on the left-hand side. That worked in most cases. If that didn't work, I actually just put some big text up the top of the image, which said, this is the way it goes. Anyway, basically it worked in terms of forcing it to keep the orientation and not flip it. One fun thing we've just discovered is that in some cases, when in the sort of 1940s, I think, the paper is quite thin. It's sort of that like Bible paper, thin paper. And Tesseract in some cases is actually picking up the print from the pages underneath the current page. So it's sort of meshing them all together. So I've got to now figure out ways of separating that out. And in general, part of the issue with something like Textract is it's, you know, effectively a black box. So it's hard to know what's actually going on when there is a problem. And that's sort of, whoops, one of the frustrating things. What did I just do? One of the frustrating things of working with a product like that. So the process from there, once you get the data back from Textract, you're getting these big JSON objects where you can see a line of text there, and that's the handwritten text, that's the line of printed text. So you get both line data and you get word data. So here's the last word up there, brothers here. Usefully, it tells you whether it thinks it's printed or handwriting. In actual fact, I'm not at the moment using the line data because I've found it's actually not that reliable in terms of actually lining up the print and the handwriting. So what I'm effectively doing is finding all the words, finding the vertical center of each identified word, and then clustering those vertical centers to see where the lines are, and then arranging them according to their left-hand values of each word. So reassembling the lines. And that seems to do a better job of actually finding the rows in the tables than the sort of lines identified within the OCR. So the process, get back the data from Textract, do lots of analysis to try and reassemble those rows and those columns, and then produce it all out as a nice structured data. So this is where we're getting to from the column image here. So the column with the share names, the offers for buy, the offers to sell, and the actual sales. So here we have them represented within a CSV file. So the handwriting recognition, it's obviously far from perfect, and there's still going to be a lot of work in cleaning that up. But you know, it's a good start. And what it means, again, is that we can start to provide some new access points to researchers, even before we get to a data set where we're sort of happy that you can actually start to do computational work on the values of these. We can actually use the fact that there is some sort of value in there to explore the data set. So this is a case of visualizing activity. So across a year. So what we're seeing here on a particular date is how many of the shares had values in those three columns. So how many shares had values in the buyers, sellers, and sales columns each day. So you can see, as you would expect, there's more values in the buyers and sellers column than there is actually in the sales, like the business done. And you can start to see how there are sort of variations over time, which could, you know, be interesting from a historical point of view to explore further. But again, in terms of analyzing the process, we can see where there are problems where things start to break down. So there's something odd going on here. And indeed, this is one of those places where we're starting to get that bleed through from the pages because of the thin paper. And so we're now at the point where I was able to take all that data in those CSV files. I loaded them into an SQLite database and using a tool called Dataset, basically created a front end So you can now actually search that complete data set. I mean, as I say, still lots of problems with it, and we're still cleaning up and working with it. But even at this point, we think there's value in, starting to expose some of this for research. So there's 20 million rows within this data set. It works quite reasonably within data set. I've uploaded it to Google Cloud, yeah, it works surprisingly well. So yeah, so I think the interesting thing in this project is as I say, been trying out these different processes, visualizing the results, thinking about what that means in terms of access and possibilities there, rather than thinking about getting to the end point where everything's perfect, where we'll have a nice product, but thinking about different points where we can make access available and how it improves potential access to that data set. Okay, and that's it from me.
Cool. Thanks very much, Tim and Catherine. That was a fascinating presentation. And especially Tim, thanks for being so generous with sharing the full breadth of the process, including the challenges and things that you've got there. I have had a question come through in the chat for Tim. One is a bit of a simple question, hopefully, and then I might have one of my own questions if I can use the chair's prerogative there. Gareth Watkins has asked, have you tried high contrasting the image to remove that bleed through of the print? Has suggested that he's done that successfully with other newsprint material.
Yeah, I haven't yet, but that was what I was going to do. Yeah, I mean, that's something we've just discovered recently, that we're getting that bleed through. So yeah, fiddling with the contrast was the first thing that I was going to start playing with. So hopefully that will help us. I mean, first of all, we have to sort of identify where it's really happening, and that's where those sort of visualizations that I was showing are useful. So being able to see, because it is a paper dependent thing, obviously it's sort of particular volumes it's going to be relevant to. So at the moment, I'm just sort of figuring out where those issues are, and then I'll again start playing with the images and see if we can improve the results. But yes, that's the sort of approach that I have in mind.
Great. And I will actually go straight on with another questions come through the chat. This is from, I can't see who from, but Rowan, thanks very much. Enjoyed the discussion of the process involved in arriving at an accurate view of the data set. It was fantastically detailed. I echo that, thanks. Can you speak a little on how you arrive at a point of confidence that you're sufficiently and correctly seeing and visualizing what is there?
I mean, it's, I suppose, just sort of, I mean, it's an evolving process. So for each stage, as I was saying, it's those developing the visualization, which is able to identify a problem. It's then sort of churning it through a range of tests, so pulling out random samples within the data set and trying those to seeing how they go. And when we do expose it to use, I mean, that will also obviously identify where there are problems as well. I mean, that's sort of part of the thing. So again, with this sort of scale and the fact that we're still learning about it, the collection as we go along, I'm not confident at all that we've solved all the problems. It's often a case of just you solve one problem and that exposes a new set of problems. So I mean, obviously down the track, obviously once we do start working with those handwritten values, and we want to, we will have to think about what level of confidence we have in those handwritten values, and how we present that to researchers so that they can know what confidence they can have in that data, I suppose, is the question. It's not necessarily, I suppose, that we're going to have solved every problem, but that we can at least in some way describe or quantify the remaining problems so that researchers who are approaching them know what they're dealing with. So, as I suppose I've said earlier, in terms of just knowing what pages are missing, for example, you know, if you're a researcher, knowing what's not there is obviously, you know, significant. It may be that, you know, in the finished, well, you know, at different stages, there may be, because obviously one of the big challenges is those ones where there's just lots of scribbling all over the page. You know, there's lots of changes and crossing out and writing in and all that sort of stuff. So they're obviously the most complex pages, and it may even not be possible from a human point of view to figure out what's going on some of those pages. So there may be some where we just say, well, you know, it's best guess in terms of what's going on here. So I suppose that's what I suppose we're aiming for, is to get to that point where we feel, well, there may not be one point again, I suppose. I suppose is the thing, that it's different points. Saying, okay, we're at a point here where we've done this process and we think this makes it useful for this purpose. You know, have a go. And we may then identify things that we can do further. And then at another point we say, okay, we've addressed this problem, but there's still this problem remaining. So I suppose that process will continue for some time, and it will sort of feed back with the sort of use that might be made of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree, Tim. I think actually what you're talking about there is that really interesting point where your intersection is between the computational processes to make this accessible and the communication and social kind of challenge of ensuring that it can be found and used appropriately and is useful, and even how you manage that process of improvements as research is done with that collection as well. If I've got a couple more questions in the chat, but I might be indulgent and stick my question in as well. This is a really great walkthrough of one of the key challenges when it comes to libraries, archives and museums making digitised content accessible for computational analysis, that there is a big step of work between the digitised item and the full text or structured data availability. And that's a hurdle that I think we're all seeing and not necessarily knowing how to overcome. And this has been a great case study of how you have worked on overcoming that. Can I put this question perhaps both to Tim and Catherine about any observations that you can make about how this sort of work might be brought into an archives workflow, or what kind of skills or resources might be needed inside the archives? It's been great to do this as an experimental project, but it seems like this might be something that needs to be considered as part of business as usual in the future if we're going to use these collections for these sorts of things. Do you have any observations on that?
Do you want me to go, Catherine, or?
You go first and then I'll go.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, and we were talking about this, I think, at our last meeting, a bit about where, you know, you might go from here. And as with this project, I don't think there's a sort of one-size-fits-all approach, and it'd be looking at this at different collections and what you might want to get out of them. Obviously, in this case, we've got a very structured data set. So, and part of the value in it is going to be try and get out data that you can use computationally. But, you know, obviously in other cases, you know, if you've got, you know, diaries or letters or whatever, then it might be just the text content you're interested in. The structure's not so valuable. So there may be different approaches. And again, you know, we didn't end up using Transcribus for this project, but you know, if you are working with a diary that's written in a particular hand over same, then, you know, that seems like more of an ideal candidate for Transcribus. You know, the scale things and stuff like that meant that it sort of ended up with Textract, but, you know, different tools for different processes. So I think part of, I suppose, the work of archives is thinking about, as they always do, about potential users of collections, and how you can open those up, both in terms of discoverability and in terms of computational use, and the sort of tools and processes that might be appropriate for different collections.
Yeah, I think I'll just echo some of those things that Tim said, and also comment on that, you know, the sort of the skills or what needs to be inside the archives. This has been a fantastic project, I think, from my point of view, because it's a bit of exposure to that amount of work that's required to do this sort of process. And, you know, that's not something that we've traditionally done in the archives. And so we need to understand how this works and what it takes. And then knowing that, how do we do it in the future? Because, you know, this has been a project we've been able to do, but, you know, we couldn't do this for everything. And then that question about, well, what do you apply it to? So it's been very useful to see it in this project with these types of records, but we are always saying that archives are unique. Almost every page in this has its own personality. And so the challenge is to think about, well, how do we apply these sorts of things to other sets of records, to other archives? And so we've been thinking about, well, you know, are there registers where we want to extract names? Are there registers that are not simple but complex like this one? Is it worth doing that? Or are we better doing something like the, you know, the citizen science model of people actually contributing? And that's something we haven't done as yet. But I think there's potential for, you know, extracting for researchers things that are hard to get to without reading the whole thing. So name index out of set of records that's quite variable. But I guess I would say we're thinking about where next. Probably smaller, probably a bit different, that we might try and experiment on ourselves, but knowing how this one has gone is really very valuable for what we might do in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. James, did you have some questions you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I see there's a question here from Nick around, probably to Tim. Did you have a go using Digivol or From the Page for transcription?
No, I mean, obviously I know about them, but I mean, the part of transcription in this project thus far has been quite small. So it was really just looking at, and it was just in-house. So just staff were just working on it in terms of just looking at the dates and things. You know, if as part of this project or another project, we were looking at opening up for a crowdsource thing, then yes, we'd be looking at the different projects, and they all again have their different strengths and weaknesses. So it's a matter of you know, tossing those up and seeing what would be appropriate for each project.
There's a couple more questions here about Dataset, but I see someone, Ingrid, thank you very much for posting a link to Dataset there, so some more information about that.
Yeah, Dataset's really cool. If you've got a CSV file, you can just basically throw it at it, and it creates a sort of nice interface where you can start to explore it. I'm still sharing, so let me just see if I can. So that's the current instance with its 20 million rows, and it's surprisingly fast. If I do something now, it's going to be slow because it goes to sleep. It's on Google Cloud, so it sort of goes to sleep when you're not using it and then wakes up again. I'm not going to share the, well, you can see the link there, but don't use it at the moment. Just because it might go away, and I'm still figuring out how much it costs at the moment, to tell you the truth, in Google Cloud. It's one of those things that's sort of hard to actually quantify. Yeah, it's still sort of an experimental stage with this, just seeing what happens, but been amazed really actually in terms of how responsive it is with 20 million rows of data. So you can, and there's a text index on it, so you can search for names within the stocks and it'll bring them up, and you can facet on business names and things like that. So again, as a sort of access point for a sort of data set in progress, I think it's going to be really, really useful and valuable. Did it just actually, let me see if it's going to, oh, there we are. No, it is actually awake now. So you can see there, I just searched on COBAR, so I get all the COBARs back, and then I can do things like facet on that stock name, so I can see all the variations there in COBAR. So you can see it's pretty quick for just a SQLite database running in the cloud.
One of the other things I really liked about your approach was the visualization, so you could start to see, you know, where are things maybe going a bit wrong. Can you just briefly talk about what tools you use to help visualize, you know, page widths and column widths and that sort of thing?
Oh, sure. So my sort of go-to tools for just about everything I do. Yeah, I'm working in Jupyter, so it's all done within Jupyter. Generally, when I'm manipulating data, I'm using pandas. And for the actual visualization, I'm using Altair. So they're sort of my go-to things. I just you know, it's personal, partly just personal preference, but I just find they work well for my purposes. And they're just they're really sort of quick and useful for that sort of iterative approach, for just sort of, you know, trying things out and seeing where they work. Oh, and one thing I should say about these ones here is that these are also linked to the database, the dataset database. So any of these points in the live version, I can click on it and it'll open up dataset, so I can actually see what's going on that day in the, well, if it was click on that one, it would show me all the things with values in the buyers column on that day. So again, a quick way of then checking to see if, you know, what's going on there, to see, for me to see potential problems. But again, this, you could also see this as an interface for researchers. So you know, researchers could be looking at these and seeing how we're getting these sort of shifts over time in buying and selling, and they could click on again on any of these points and go into the data itself to see what's going on. So it's supposed to be a useful check for me, but it's a potential sort of tool for researchers as well.
Love it. Multi-use. Very good.
Yeah, I do like that about your work, Tim, with the visualization. As is that a problem, or is that a point of interest that is worth researching? So that's really good. Thank you for sharing that. I think we may have shared all of the attendee questions in the window there. Oh, we did have one. Gareth Watkins again asked, have you thought of any other collections that you would like to apply this process to?
That's one for Catherine, is it?
Yeah, not specifically yet. I mean, as I said, we are thinking about, you know, we have a number of sort of membership lists which might have not just member but payment, for example, for trade unions and various registers, but we haven't settled on anything. And yeah, it's really just actually knowing this now, thinking, okay, looking again at the material we hold and thinking about it differently. Yeah, so not just, you know, what potential is there for researcher or research use in this, but can it be transformed to add to that research use, or do we enhance the research use by transforming? So we haven't got there yet.
I can see that it has so much potential for the archive being better informed about before they go into that process, about quantifying the scale of the challenge. If you were to think about doing it speculatively or for a particular research project, it's a really, really great benefit to the archive having had this experience. Having looked at all those questions, thank you. I'd like to perhaps wind us up there. I'd like to make my special thanks to Catherine and Tim for a really interesting and informative presentation today. I found it really interesting. Lots of links for me to follow up there. Tim did share his slides in that chat window, and I would encourage you to go in and click on those links if you want to learn more. I'd also like to thank our chat helpers behind the scenes, Ingrid and particularly James and Rowan, for joining us and helping organise this webinar today, as well as the rest of the Australian and New Zealand AI for LAM organising group. If you are interested in being more involved in the AI for LAM group, please feel free to visit the AI for LAM site as part of the international community. The best way to get notices about what's coming up in terms of webinars or activities is to be on that international mailing list. It's also a nice opportunity to see what other people in other countries are doing as well. We also have a Slack channel. You can find that information at the AI for LAM site, which I think Ingrid is sharing in the window now. And that has its own Australian New Zealand channel in that workspace as well. We are always interested in further projects to share in webinars like this. So if you do have a project that you'd like to showcase at a future webinar, please get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. And we will also obviously send you news when the next activity is planned. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you to everyone and have a lovely day.
Okay.